It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Welcome back, fellow Quillers, to another exciting episode of your favorite Shakespeare authorship podcast. My guest today is an artist and costume designer, Christopher Castle. Christopher, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm so happy to join you and to meet you over Zoom.
Before we begin our conversation, I want to get a little business out of the way. Fellow Quillers, the first emails with the details about our Quiller event in April went out to those of you on our subscriber list. We have announced the historic hotel, the event venue, the bonus performance special, and more. You need to get on our mailing list. And though I love receiving your emails, you can now subscribe to our mailing list right from the button on our homepage at don'tquillthepodcast.com. Just click on the little button, fill out the form with your name and email address, and we'll get you added. Of course, you can still email me by sending to contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com, contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. But don't miss out on the early bird registration for our magnificent April event once it opens up. And the way that you do that is to make sure that you receive that information first by being a subscriber to our email list. And now let's go ask some questions. Christopher, your history as an artist is very connected to your history as a theater artist, is what I've discovered about you. And so I'd like to talk to you a lot about those connections, as well as this collection of paintings that we're here to talk about today. Alas, Poor Ghost, which I think my listeners can guess what those are based on. But share with me a little bit of your background.
So I went to school for theater and art, studio art, in Kentucky. And then after that, I went to work in New York for a couple of years, doing sort of off-Broadway theater and all sorts of stuff there. I worked in DC for 6 years at the Washington National Opera, running the costume shop there. And also doing some freelance design and some DC regional theaters there, studio theater, signature theater. And then in 2010, I moved to Louisville, Kentucky to become the costume director at Actors Theater of Louisville, the former home of the Humana Festival of New American Plays. And I was there for 7 seasons and designed quite a lot of shows. I ran the entire costume department there and actually met my husband there. So Actors Theater was a really big part of my life. And then in about 2016, 17, I decided that I wanted to step away from theater for a while because Actors Theater is kind of like a play factory. We did 17 fully produced plays in 8 months every single season. So that was a lot. And so I wanted to sort of take a step away from that and do some more singular artistic pursuits and less collaborative artistic pursuits for a while. And as I had been a studio art major, I have always painted. I always painted costume sketches. Painting has always been a part of my life. So I wanted to make this foray into visual art. And this was actually the first series that I created. I've done a couple since, but that was the first one. So yeah.
And the Alas, Poor Ghost, it is a series of 8 paintings. Is that correct?
It is, yes.
So 8 paintings, and they're based from looking at them, it looks like they're based from an actual production of Hamlet that you must have served as the costumer for. Is that accurate? Actually,
no, this is all imagined. Everything in these paintings is imaginary, except for some of the actual physical spaces. Almost all of the physical spaces are based on locations in Actors Theater. So like the first one is my drafting table in my office at Actors Theater where I did costume sketches. There's the fitting room. There's a fight rehearsal in the rehearsal room. So all of those spaces are from Actors Theater, but everything else in the paintings is from my imagination.
Okay, so, that answers a big question for me, because in the paintings there are multiple subjects in the paintings, and I was wondering when I was, really, gazing at them and looking at the different imagery and the symbolism and the very Oxfordian aspects of the paintings that we'll talk about in just a moment. But I was wondering about the subjects in the paintings, whether they were real people, they were real artists that you had worked with, and how they felt about the Oxfordian symbolism that you were eventually going to be putting into the paintings, and if your fellow artists know your Oxfordian leadings, and whether that was a discussion that was ever had with the subjects of the paintings. But you're telling me that the subjects in the paintings are actually fictional people.
They are, yeah. Some of them are based on some people, friends and things in my life. I make an appearance in a few places. My husband's in there in a few places. But they're all imagined otherwise, for that sake, so that no one had to like sort of commit a stance that I was taking, for the Oxfordian sort of side of the authorship debate.
So what inspired this group of paintings? Have you ever worked on a production of Hamlet? Have you ever costumed a production of Hamlet? What was the impetus behind these?
So the last production I did at Actors Theater was Macbeth with Les Waters, who was the artistic director there, and who recently got nominated for Best Director Tony for Dana H., a brilliant Lucas Nath play. But anyway, yeah, I did Macbeth with him, but I've never designed Hamlet. And originally, when I was conceiving this series, I was thinking of, I always wanted to do the theatrical process and show each painting as a different step in the theatrical process. But originally, I had intended to do each painting as a different play. So one would be from King Lear, one would be from, Measure for Measure, one would be from Titus Andronicus, etc. But then my grandfather passed away and we were cleaning out his house, and I found this volume of Hamlet from when he was in high school. It had his name in it and everything. And so when I found that, it sort of like catalyzed the decision in my brain to just go with Hamlet to base them on. A, because it's probably the most autobiographical of the plays, if De Vere is author. And it's something that I've always wanted to work on and haven't had the opportunity to do so. So
it's always wonderful to have that sort of influence from our elders in our lives that sort of turn us on to specific things, or the discovery later on in life that, I didn't know that my mom was into Shakespeare, or I didn't know my grandfather had this fabulous copy of Hamlet. It's kind of a fun dive back into your own personal history in some ways when something like that happens. And what a wonderful reason to be inspired to paint these paintings. What was the draw behind sort of demonstrating the process of a costumer through the paintings as well?
I definitely show the costumer in the painting, but in the context of these paintings, I sort of saw myself more as director-designer. And since it was a non-collaborative project, it was a singular project, I sort of saw this production of Hamlet as my sort of singular vision for Hamlet through these paintings. Normally, theater is a very collaborative process. Early on, the director works with designers to come up with a concept, and you go through a whole sort of R&D period if you're doing a big production, and then you bring in other parties like the actors once you start rehearsing and everything. So it's like a very collaborative process. But painting isn't. Painting is a very singular process. So in the context of these paintings, I sort of wanted to see myself as the director designer. Sort of, it's all coming from me, and that's why, as you'll see in the paintings, there are hands that break the picture plane, and all of those hands are mine. And I wanted to break the picture plane in that way so that I could place the viewer in positions that a normal audience member for theater would never be in. So in the first one, you have the viewer in the place of the director and designer discussing the scenic model. In the third one, you have the viewer in the place of the draper who's doing the fitting on the actor playing the second player, and so on and so forth. You have the dresser in the dressing room scene with Gertrude. You have a props person handing the skull to the grave digger on the trap, etc. So I wanted to place the viewer in the position that, in these positions they don't normally get to be in. It's just an audience member for the show.
It's wonderful, sort of a behind the scenes look at the theater process and the process that occurs not only leading up to performance, but as you mentioned, you have that wonderful piece where, the prop master is sort of handing up Yorick from underneath the stage. And it's really a wonderful view into how the collaboration of theater continues while the performance is going on and the audience is seated enjoying the show.
Thank you. Yeah, I also wanted to sort of show a few different layers. So the show is definitely autobiographical because it was in my workplace and it was my line of work and it was sort of my swan song, sort of saying goodbye to theater for a while. So it's that, but it's also obviously depicting the scenes of a theatrical play being produced, the design process, the costume fitting, technical rehearsal, etc. It's also showing a production of Hamlet being produced for the first time as the literal autobiography of Edward de Vere. And it's also showing through the Oxfordian iconography and some of the symbolism and historical research and whatnot, wordplay, things like that. It's showing the Oxfordian argument for the authorship.
And I want to encourage listeners as they're listening to this episode. A lot of my listeners, they'll listen while they're in the car, or they'll listen while they're on their morning jog or out in the garden or doing their workout. But many of them have the opportunity to pop onto their computer or their phone while they're listening. And I want to encourage them to find the paintings while we discuss them. And you can find those folks at Christopher's website. It's christophercastle.com. Christopher spelled with a K, Castle spelled with a C. christophercastle.com, and you can find the collection of paintings there while we talk about them and see this wonderful series of 8 paintings. And many of you will immediately recognize a lot of the Oxfordian symbolism and iconography that Christopher has included in the works. And it's very subtle in some places and very prominent in other places. It's kind of a fun little, Find Edward series, as sort of what I was enjoying as I was looking through them is, okay, where is the Earl of Oxford? Oh, there he is. Oh, where is a hint of him here? Oh, there's a hint of him there. And here's a hint of him there. And I kind of enjoyed that sort of mystery sleuthing through the paintings.
I'm definitely a seeker, so I also enjoy that sort of thing and finding Easter eggs and things like that in paintings or other pieces of art. So that was definitely a big inspiration point.
Which of the 8 is your favorite?
I'd say the third one is probably the most autobiographical since I was a costume designer, but the first one really is my favorite. I think it was my office, and I don't know, it sort of like just sort of sets up the entire story. It's my favorite, I would say, of all of them.
I have to agree. I really like the first one a lot.
Can I just go ahead and start?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the first one is in the designer's studio, and you have 2 hands in the foreground. I imagine them as the director and the designer sort of parsing through the scenic design for the play. And behind the scenic model that you see, there are pieces of historical research, and I'm sure Quillers will definitely recognize Edward de Vere and the Welbeck portrait with the beret, and then the other one that's suspected to be Edward de Vere with the armor. And then behind that, we have some pictures of Hedingham Castle, which definitely inspired the scenic design. Since I am producing this since this imagined production, I should say, is the literal autobiography of Edward de Vere, I wanted it to be set in sort of a conflation of Hedingham Castle with a little bit of Kronborg Castle, the Danish royal seat as well. So we have some research images of those on the back wall. We have a floor plan, the Oxford players. You see Hamlet, or it's actually somewhat obscure, but the educated viewer will, I think, glean that it's Hamlet. And then on the model, we see a great hall with the big Norman arch that is found in Hedingham Castle. And this is a big gallery sort of space in the castle. And I wanted to have sort of a family gallery wall on the back wall of the space. So we see portraits of Robert Dudley, who we all know stands in for Claudius. We see pictures of Elizabeth as Gertrude. We see pictures of Burleigh as Polonius and Cecil as Ophelia. There's even some Thomas Seymour is in there, and Henry Risley. And then we have the Veronese portrait of the unidentified man who could or could not be Edward de Vere. He was in Italy at the same time it was painted. And then poking through the down left top arch, we see Peregrine Bertie, who's sort of the connective tissue for me with the Hamlet story and Edward de Vere. He was Edward de Vere's brother-in-law, and he was the English ambassador to the court of Denmark at the time. and sent or brought back a pamphlet about the Danish court in which the names Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are found. So he's sort of a connective thread in De Vere's own family to this story. And then we see model pieces for the characters who are in this scene. So as I said before, each painting is an allegorical representation of a scene from the play, this one being Hamlet's first line. And so his first line is a little more than kin and less than kind. And so we're showing here that the relationship between Hamlet and De Vere through the paintbrush pointing to the model piece of Hamlet, and the finger pointing to the research images of De Vere, and the ruling pin between the copy of Hamlet and the other picture of De Vere on the desk, that we're drawing these allusions between Hamlet and Oxford. And conspicuously, we'll see Ophelia's model piece is turned over here on the model to sort of show the absence from De Vere's life that, of Anne Cecil. They were estranged for quite a while and they never had a great relationship. So Ophelia represents her in this play. So throughout, you'll see that Ophelia is slightly there, but we never see her actual face or her actual character.
There's a lot happening in that painting.
And on the wings.
You have a great amount of things happening in that painting, and it really sets the tone for the series of the other paintings. And as I listen to you, describe some of the things that you're pointing out that I noticed in the painting, but it's so wonderful to hear you, the artist, sort of explain why you placed them the way you did, why you made the choices that you did. And so, again, fellow Quillers, if you're have the opportunity, you want to try to look at the images while you're listening to Christopher's commentary about his works. And in a bit, we're going to explain why it's so important that you are hearing about them and how you might even be able to get your hands on them. Right, Christopher?
Sorry, I think I just lost the sound here.
I was sharing with the listeners that we're going to explain how they can get their hands on this collection of paintings if they so choose, and we'll share that with them later in the episode.
Yes. So just to finish up this painting, there are a few other little details. I have plays on his name throughout. So Oxgall, which is a watercolor sort of medium, is in this painting. There are 5 paintbrushes. The Earl's coronet usually is 5-pointed with pearls, and so I have these sort of buff-colored paintbrushes. But then 3 of the paintbrushes are sort of pushed up in the cup. It's a slight allusion to the Prince Tudor theory. There wasn't even a Prince of Wales at the time, but it's an allusion to the Prince of Wales 3-feather sort of crest, which is a modern take on the son of the monarch, but I'm using it here as a little device. There's a tube of paint that's Viridian, so I got in some Vir there. There's a fact is erasers because we're trying to reveal the facts of the matter here. And then on the back wall of the model, you'll see a bunch of coats of arms, and the ones on the upstage wall are all members of the royal family, of the imagined royal family, I should say. So Dudley and Elizabeth, the Tudor coat of arms, the De Vere coat of arms, the Cecil coat of arms, and a few other ones, including Seymour and Boleyn and a few other more distant family members. And then on the stage left wall, we see the coats of arms of some of the other authorship candidates that have been presented, including, James I and Ben Jonson and Shakespeare himself, and there's a few other ones there, Bacon and Sidney, etc. So yeah, I think that's pretty much most of the details in this one. There's a few books and things. There's a Cardanus's Comfort. I have a book on English castles, which has my artistic sigil, and then the heraldry book, Wilbur Swinton, is a play on sort of the boar from wild boar from Swinetown. That's what those 2 words mean, with De Vere's coat of arms there, but they're a play on the boar on his family crest.
Yeah, there's like I said, there's a lot going on in that first painting, and it really is a wonderful gallery, as it were, just on its own, without the 7 others that follow. But it that piece in itself would be a wonderful piece for somebody to have who is enthralled with this mystery and who truly believes that Edward de Vere is the author. But tell us about some of the other works that are in the collection.
I will just go through each one and sort of be a little bit more brief with the other ones. The second one is called The Bore of the Matter, and it's in the theatrical process, it's the read-through one. So we have all of the actors here gathered together to read the play for the first time. It's everyone's first day at rehearsal. And in sort of this part of the story, the sort of realistic part of the play being produced, we have Horatio standing here as the Actors Equity representative, doing sort of the Actors Equity business, but he's also representing Horatio in the play because this painting represents two different scenes in the play. It's the only one that does, but it's the scene in which Claudius is talking to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern about, spying on Hamlet. And then it's also with the text that's on the director's notebook in the front, we see it's the sailors, when the sailors enter and they're bringing the letter to Horatio saying that Hamlet's been captured by pirates. It's sort of conflating both of those scenes because the first scene sets up the second scene. The second scene is the manifestation of the first scene. So that's sort of the scene from the play that it's representing. And so we have the characters from those two scenes here, but it's also still the read through. So we have some of the ephemera from the play. You see the model repeated on a little plinth in the back. You see some floor plans. We see the costume sketches on the back wall. And each one of those I designed specifically for this production, and made the miniature for this. We see Ophelia is also missing from this scene, even though she is in the first scene, Act 3, Scene 2, I think it is. We see her little name plate here on the front of the table, just peeking out. And in the foreground, we see, this is my arm, this is the sort of the director's notebook, and there are a lot of clues on this. First of all, it's the sailor scene from Hamlet, which is one of the most closely aligned things that actually happened in Edward de Vere's life. When he was on his way home to England, the same thing happened to him. His ship was boarded by pirates, and they stole all of the things that he was bringing back from Italy. And he was basically left on the shores of Dover with just a shirt on, very much like Hamlet. But here on the director's notebook, his blocking notebook, we see that text along with some of the symbols from Edward de Vere's Geneva Bible. So there's a manicule, a vine leaf, a flower. On the post-its, we see lines 1740, which alludes to Oxford's code name. We see the 0000, which was in the original version of the first folio, and I have a note there to add it back. We see 3 post-its with Edward de Vere's birthday, 624. There's a tarot card poking out of the copy of Hamlet, representing sort of his role as the sun in the literary circles of the Elizabethan day. There's a Moxie soda with another play on ox. And then on the sort of stack of post-its, we have Menta Vitibor, which is from the cover of Minerva Britannia, which everyone thinks is sort of a veiled, it's by the mind I shall be seen. So it's a little cartouche, and it's a hand poking out from a curtain, and it's thought that it's Edward de Vere. And then below that, there's an anagram of my full name, Christopher Castle, which is stockpile her arts, which I think is what Edward de Vere was being tasked by the Queen to do in the face of the oncoming Spanish Armada, creating all of the history plays to sort of galvanize England around a national cause. And then other little details, the poster for this imagined production is the Ashbourne portrait of maybe Hugh Hammersley, who was the Lord Mayor of London, but other people believe it's Edward de Vere. And he's clutching a book that looks very much like Edward de Vere's Geneva Bible in it. And so those are some of the clues in this one.
A lot of people aren't familiar with the theatrical process, and I think that it's very obvious when you look at the plays, and especially when you look at some of the aspects of Hamlet, that the writer obviously was very familiar with the theatrical process, was very familiar with the process of not only writing plays, but directing plays for performance, and most likely also a performer as well. And I think that's one of the things that we really see here. And when you look at the life of Edward de Vere and the pageantry that he is known historically for having been a part of outside of the realm of the theater, but in theatrical sense, whether it was the big crossing of the bridge with 200 men upon him, coming into his own, or the big mock battle that he staged that actually burned down some houses, is a wonderful story in history.
Right.
When you think about how he was such a patron of other writers and of music and of other arts, It's really nice to see some sort of behind the scenes aspects of how our art form is still created today. And, I love that one of the things that you've included here is sketch designs and research pieces for what a director does when they're preparing for performance, how design decisions are made. That first read through around the table, which we call table work, in the process of rehearsal before we actually get on our feet, where the director is sharing details about the characters and about the play and about what the author's intent was for the play. And it's one of the reasons why I really like that second painting is I get asked this all the time, which is, does it make a difference who wrote the plays when you're directing the plays? And I say it absolutely makes a difference. And I share with my actors what my beliefs are about the author and about the author's intent of the scene and about the real life person that the character is most likely a caricature of, or is meant to lampoon, or is meant to represent from his life. And I think that those things bring such a greater level of enrichment and detail to the performance of the actor that it drives me crazy when I hear actors who say, oh, it doesn't matter, I'm there to play the role, and it doesn't matter who wrote the play. That just drives me insane, because I think it's a cop-out. I think it's a way to excuse the authorship mystery out of the equation.
Right. Completely agree with you. I think art is so much richer when we understand the people who make it and why they made it, and what motivated them to make it, and their own personal stories that are in it. I mean, this work of art itself is full of my own, personal stories, and every work of art is. And to think that it isn't is just insane, really.
And you're exemplifying that by sharing with us details of these paintings that we wouldn't otherwise understand or know, or perhaps not even see, if it weren't for the fact that you, the creator, are sharing the details, the motivations, the intent, and the symbolism behind what you've created.
Right. Yeah, on the surface, these could just be a series of paintings about producing a play. And, if someone has never seen any of these portraits of Edward de Vere or any of this ephemera before, they'd have no idea. So it's almost sort of like, Leonardo da Vinci hiding his sort of thoughts in The Last Supper. And I'm obviously not comparing myself to him, but sort of in that same vein of like hiding things for posterity, because who knows what happens with words. Books get burned, art gets burned as well. But, it's having it in a visual sort of medium, I think, allows it to be rediscovered in the future, perhaps. And, someone can cross-reference some of these images with things they find in books and realize what sort of story I'm telling without me having to be completely obvious about it for people who don't know.
So let's move on to number 3, which you said is one of your favorites in the series.
Yes. So this is actually my fitting room from Actors Theater. And that's me there in the pink shirt. As the director designer of this play. And I'm also sort of standing in for Hamlet in this scene, because this is the speak the speech I pray you trippingly on the tongue speech. And so we see here the second player who plays the player Queen, who I imagine this is since I'm doing it as the literal autobiography of Edward de Vere, I imagine this is an all-male performance troupe. And I actually wanted to have a performer who looked somewhat similar to Edward de Vere with the same sort of coloring, because I thought it would be just kind of like, I don't know, nasty of him to have someone who looked like him play his mother in some weird way. And I have that actor here. I'm using the rainbow portrait, which was commissioned by William Cecil for Queen Elizabeth's last progress, that she was coming to his house for a stay. And he had this portrait commission for her, and it's supposed to be representative of her intelligence apparatus. It's covered in eyes and ears. There's a snake on the sleeve. So we see that in the mirror, and then we also see in the foreground the sort of backside of that, and the draper who is, pinning out a shoulder seam here to take it in for an alteration. We see the back of the dress, and some of the embroidery here are some of the flowers from. Well, there's a Hebanon flower is one of them, and then some of the other ones are flowers from Ophelia's Madness bouquet on the back of the bodice. And then on the sleeve itself, we have some Tudor roses and, climbing Tudor roses and vines, sort of symbolizing a little bit the Prince Tudor theory. And then throughout the room, there are other pieces of costume ephemera. On the back shelf, we see the helmet and the beret from the Welbeck portrait. So that represents De Vere and his father. And there's some triple towels and things scattered in those shoe boxes. We have the Queen's wig here. We have the research images of the costume sketches and the research images for the two costumes for the second player, the one that he enters in and the one that he plays the Queen in. And then there are 4 T's going down the drawers on the labels there. So that represents the sort of 4T. And then I think on the clock, it's been a while since I've done all these, but I think it's the second hand is pointing to 17 and it's making a V with the other 2 hands. So the clock's in the 2 that have clocks that tell stories as well.
Again, a lot going on in there and a lot of little fun, like you call, in the film industry, they call them Easter eggs. There's a lot of those going on in each of these paintings that on first glance, we don't catch until, you share with us and say, okay, well, take a look at the clock. Look what's happening in the clock. And one of the things that I love about how much you have sort of embedded into these images is it really sort of reflects how much has been embedded into the texts of the works, particularly the first folio, particularly the sonnets. I mean, when we look at what Edward himself has done in, sort of delivering these clues to us about him being the writer and about the details of the plays and the details of the sonnets, you've sort of taken that to this, visual level with your art. And I really like that. It's a really compelling aspect of the paintings. I also am really impressed with your use of mirrors and reflections in the paintings, which you do in a couple of different ones. This one is one of them. There's another one that sort of the, there's even like a handheld, like compact mirror that you show in the painting that I think is a reflection of you standing behind the actor who's holding it. Is that what's happening there? It's very Greg Toland, yes. Citizen Kane of you, by the way, if you're familiar with that film and some of the wonderful things that Greg Toland does with reflections and in glass in that movie. You're very, channeling not only Edward de Vere, but I think Greg Toland in some of these artworks.
Well, thank you. That's a big compliment. But mirrors are a huge part of theater. I mean, mirrors are in rehearsal rooms and dressing rooms and costume fitting rooms, backstage. They're sort of everywhere in theater. And, this is a story about someone's, identity sort of being taken away from them as well. And sort of that's a mirror image. And in the painting you're talking about, which is the 5th painting, the closet scene, there's I can go ahead and talk about that one actually, if you'd like, or should I go ahead and talk about the 4th one?
Let's go to the 4th one, and then let's go through the 4th one, and then we can talk more in depth about the 5th one with the double mirror. It's almost like double mirror layers going on there.
Right. Yeah. So the 4th one is called Treachery, Seek It Out. Oh, and I should say the other one was As Twere a Mirror Up to Nature. That was the costume fitting one. That's the name of that one, and that's a line from that scene. All of the names are actual lines from the scenes that they're, that they're allegorical representations of. So the 4th one is Treachery, Seek It Out, which is the fight between the sword fight between Hamlet and Laertes at the end of the play. So here we see a fight rehearsal happening, and for those who don't know, anytime that there's a fight in a play, there's almost always a fight director of some sort assigned to it. And during the rehearsal process, you'll have specific rehearsals just for that. And then also during the run of the play, you'll have specific rehearsals before each performance in which all of the fights are run, everything's tested out, everyone tests all the weapons, et cetera, to make sure that everything is safe.
And we call that a fight call.
So we have a
you have a makeup. Sometimes you have a costume call, a makeup call, especially if you have very extensive, detailed makeup. Like for instance, let's say you're playing Ariel in The Tempest, you may have a special makeup call. But you also, in any combat sequences that occur on stage, there's a fight call, and those combat sequences are run prior to everyone going and getting into their costume and getting into makeup. Yes.
So here we have the fight rehearsal during the actual rehearsal process and another allegorical representation of this scene in the play. So we see in the foreground a hand breaking the picture plane, and that's the hand of Hamlet, the actor playing Hamlet. advancing towards Laertes, who's advancing towards Hamlet. And we see this reflected in the mirror. We see Hamlet under a fencing foil, and we see the back of Laertes. And then in the foreground, we see the front of Laertes. And each of them have the coats of arms of their respective real people. So that's the Cecil coat of arms on Thomas Cecil, is who would be Laertes in real life. And then the De Vere coat of arms backwards on Hamlet. And we also see the De Vere coat of arms on the throne in the back, against the back wall. We also see Gertrude on her throne, representing the fact that she dies in this place. She's asleep in the throne. The other person in the blue, I was thinking of as the fight director, and he's encouraging Laertes to advance on Hamlet, just as Claudius is in the scene. And then using the reflective quality of the mirror here, I'm showing Horatio as the only person who we see both in sort of the real action and his face in the mirror. And that's because Horatio is the only person of these that lives from this scene. And he's in green, sort of representing his alliance to Vere, or green, Edward de Vere. Some of the little Easter eggs in this one, I really like this one because I like spike tape. Spike tape is a huge part of theater. It's found in the rehearsal room.
There are a lot of my listeners who don't know what spike tape is.
Yeah. So all of the lines on the floor, those pink lines, that's spike tape. And spike tape is usually like a fluorescent color or a bright color to denote the sort of layout of the set during the rehearsal process. And so here it's showing the front steps of the stage. And between the two fighters, we have 17 dash marks in pink spike tape, representing the 17 of the Earl of Oxford's ordinal for his earldom. And then sort of right underneath the mirror, there's an extension cord that curls around the number 40, because Edward de Vere, and Alexander Waugh has done a ton of work and has a ton of videos about this, but one of the code names for Edward de Vere is 1740. And I won't go on about that because I don't know as much about it as he does, but I would highly suggest looking at all of his videos on YouTube. And then some of the other props, the duffel bag has the word Exeter on it. And Exeter was I think it was the barony granted to that side of the Cecil family. There's a tote bag that has Sidney tennis, which relates to another fight in Edward de Vere's life between him and Philip Sidney on a tennis court. We see some of those same research images from a couple of the first three paintings on the bulletin board in the back. Stuff like that is usually in rehearsal rooms to inspire people and sort of show them some of the things that the costumes and sets are based on. We have some of the props from the play, so some mobile torches and some of the spears and axes, the thrones, etc., some of the ephemera from the actual play itself. And then there are posters of some other Shakespeare plays, Othello, Julius Caesar, Titus, and Macbeth on the back wall. And here again, the time on the clock, I think, is 1740 at military time. And then the second hand is pointing to the 17. And then on the glove of Hamlet, there's a little triple towel. So those are all just some of the little Easter eggs relating back to Edward de Vere and his code names.
Why those posters? Why those plays in the posters? Any particular reason? Are those some of your favorites?
Well, I had just done Macbeth. And that was sort of the cover of I always do these little books to hold all of my sketches, and that was the cover of mine. I've always wanted to do Titus Andronicus. I know it's like so different from all the rest, but there's something about that play I absolutely love. I think Julius Caesar and Othello are self-evident because they're both very much about him. Well, they all kind of are, but those are just some of the ones that I wanted to include. The other one was King Lear, but I ended up extending the curtain and sort of covered up that photograph. But I really actually liked that poster that I designed for that. You can also see in the back, just to represent what happens in this scene, the ewer and the 3 cups representing the poisoning that happens. There's the skulls from the graveyard, Hamlet's book, etc. So those are just some of the other little details. And the black curtain against the mirror is sort of representative of the death that sort of is inserting itself into the scene over the course of the scene, because so many people die in this scene. So it's just sort of this visual reminder of, oncoming death, I suppose, this black curtain.
Okay, so now let's move on to the next one, which is one of my favorites.
The next one is Mutine and a Matron's Bones. This is also one of my favorites. So this is the closet scene or the chamber scene or whatever, between Hamlet and Gertrude, in which he kills Polonius. So we see the actress playing Gertrude here at her mirror with all of the sort of trappings of a dressing room mirror. We see her makeup kit there, and inside the makeup kit, there's a picture that's believed to be Queen Elizabeth when she may or may not have been pregnant. It's a very unusual garment for her to wear, and she's standing beside a doe, which is a sort of symbol of fertility. And in that box is a youthful portrait of De Vere and a portrait of Thomas Seymour, who, if De Vere, if I have all sorts of different versions of the Prince Tudor theory sort of in here in all of these paintings, but if the anonymous movie sort of version of the Prince Tudor theory is correct, then Edward de Vere could have been the first bastard child of Queen Elizabeth. And if that was the case, it was likely the result of Thomas Seymour's involvement in her life through her, I can't remember what sort of family member it was, but it was one of her family members who he was married to. And there's actually an account from her friend Kat saying that they were found in bed together, sort of being, it doesn't say they were having sex, but it says that they were sort of like romping about or whatever. So it's thought that perhaps he might be the father of Edward de Vere, also a ginger. But in the context of this scene, we see the dresser coming into the room, carrying this actress's wig that she will wear in the next scene as Gertrude. He's also carrying a locket. And the locket, in this scene, Hamlet refers to a pair of pictures that's on Gertrude's dressing table that are Claudius and the dead King Hamlet, two brothers. And here in this locket, I have portraits of Henry Risley and Edward de Vere, who, in another version of the Prince Tudor theory, could be brothers, both bastard children of Queen Elizabeth, or could be father and son. Because of the nature of the scene and the way that Gertrude feels towards Hamlet in this scene, I have a couple of tiny little clues towards that. There's the rue, which is the little bottle of sort of herbal supplement there. And at the time, rue was used as an abortifacient to abort your baby. And then there's also a script of I Hate Hamlet, which was one of the very first plays I ever was in high school. And also sort of how Gertrude is feeling about her son in this scene. And on some of the makeup items, there's some 17s and 40s. There's the ox from Noxzema. There's clown white, which represents Queen Elizabeth's lead paint that she used on her face. But in sort of the composition of this scene, we see all of these things happening in this mirror. So we see Gertrude looking into the mirror. We see her from behind. We see the body of the dresser coming into the room in the mirror, but his face is covered up with a greeting card, which has the Droeshout portrait of from the first folio on it, which says, "Methinks I see these things with parted eye when everything seems double," sort of showing the duality of this. And with me representing the director designer, sort of the vessel for bringing Edward de Vere's story to life for these paintings, still the mainstream narrative is prevailing and covering those attempts up, and that's sort of what that card represents, covering up my face. Then we see some more research images here of Queen Elizabeth. And then in the mirror, we see a black curtain, which is like a changing curtain in the dressing room. And below that, a pair of feet, which I intended to be Polonius. And then in the other mirror on the right, we see another mirror across the room and someone else's costumes. And we see Ophelia's name backwards on the mirror. So that's another allusion to her being absent from his life. And the two bouquets of flowers there are yet again some more flowers from her madness bouquet. And then there are 17 lights around Gertrude's mirrors, and there are 17 lights around Ophelia's mirror. And I think that's most of what's in this one. And otherwise, just some costume ephemera. There's a ruff, some shoes, her box that all of her accessories would be in, etc. And then the last thing, the mug says, "Frailty, thy name ain't woman," because "Frailty, thy name is woman" is a very famous line from the play. So I wanted to do something that was kind of like feminist, and this actress was like, so yeah.
Yeah, it's a good one. Like I said, I love the multiple reflections and the way that you use the mirrors there. It's very clever.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I like sort of playing with mirrors. This one was a very hard one to do for my imagination. I had to do like a lot of photo setups with my own face and sort of all of these. I have crazy random photographs on my phone of like different setups of my hands and like props and just trying to get like the lighting and the sort of perspective of everything correct in each one. It was very challenging in some of them.
Well, and I've taken some art classes. I'm not an artist. I'm not a painter. But one of the things that I think most people who have taken any kind of art class know, that hands are the most difficult thing in the world to draw and paint correctly. For some reason, the human hand is just one of those super complex things that is very difficult to replicate accurately in art. And when you look at a lot of portraits, there are hands, even some Elizabethan portraits, where the hands of the subjects are kind of weird looking. They're kind of misshapen. The fingers don't quite lay right. It's a very difficult thing to paint, is the hand. And it's a reason why many cartoon characters only have 3 fingers. If you look at, the famous ones like Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse, and the reason why that artists draw them with only 3 fingers is because it's easier to draw a hand that only has 3 fingers. There's something about having all 5 fingers, 4 fingers and a thumb, that make the hand very complex and difficult to draw. So if you're doing a, animated character, you just go, well, you're going to take that pinky right out of the equation and make life easier on me.
Right. I love painting hands. It's probably one of my favorite things to paint. My least favorite thing to paint are leaves and foliage, just because they take forever and they're so like sort of, I don't know, they could be abstract or exact or real. They're very complicated. But hands are very difficult. They have a lot of different planes and a lot of different colors, a lot of different lines. So yeah, but it's one of my favorite things to paint, actually. And this was a great excuse to sort of paint a lot of them.
Well, no, and you do, and because of the way, like you say, you've sort of broken the plane so often with these paintings and sort of given the viewer this first person feeling. And I think that's what you've captured here with this series of paintings is, the audience, as it were, becomes a participant in the scene they're gazing upon. And I think that's a wonderful perspective. And it's a very refreshing thing that you don't see a lot in in this type of art.
Right. Yeah, that was definitely the goal.
Okay. So where are we at? We're at number 6
move on
now.
to number 6. Yeah. So the next one is tech rehearsal. So we have the scene is
everyone's favorite rehearsal, by the way.
Oh yeah, start and stop, 10 out of 12. Yeah.
And we all love the
worse,
cue to cues are the best. Everybody just loves doing a cue to cue.
Oh god. Yeah, how fun. This painting is called "This Eternal Blazon Must Not Be," and this painting is about a scene between Hamlet and his father, the ghost, and it's all about fatherhood and lineage and legacy, I suppose. So here we have a scene from the lighting grid, and we have the hands on the foreground are a lighting technician who's changing the gel in a theatrical light. And the gel, for those who don't know, is just a piece of colored plastic that can change a light from being warm to cool or green to red, whatever. And on the gel, we see the number 17, just to get that one in. But the action on the stage is the director has stopped things, and we see that he's asking some stagehands to move a scenic piece, which is Headingham Castle. And it's sort of forced perspective. So it almost looks like Hamlet and his father are standing out on the coast near the castle. Not that Headingham's on the coast, but Kronborg Castle is. So it's sort of conflating the two. And then the castle is in the distance. And we see the 2 technicians moving it. And then we see a technician putting more spike tape down. And she's holding the spike tape, which makes an O, and then she's putting down an X. So that's a little ox there. The Northern Lights, I've read, would be happening during this time of year that this scene takes place in Hamlet, and at this time that the play was written, at that time in history. So I wanted to include those. It's ghostly. It's sort of the right sort of color palette, and it's also otherworldly. And I think it just sort of works for this scene in the context of the way I've done it. The proscenium around the stage is made up of a printer's device that is found on the title page of Hamlet in the first folio. It's sort of a little zigzag interspersed with a sort of almost an arabesque kind of pattern. It's not arabesque, but it's similar. So I copied that verbatim and wanted that to be the proscenium, sort of the box around it all. And then that same element is copied on the lighting fixture, the theater's lighting fixture that we see on the wall, which is sort of an Art Deco fixture, but it's capped on both ends with Earl's coronets, which are coronets with 5 pearls, sort of driving home the sort of Earl thing. In the audience, we see the one of the lighting master electrician, probably with his computer and sort of adjusting the lighting. And then the person beside him is actually a little homage to Les Waters, who I worked with on several plays. We worked together quite a bit. He was sort of a theatrical father and the artistic director of Actors Theater, so I wanted to include him from behind. And then on the notebook in front of him, we see a projected O over a T, the sort of seam in the papers. And then each of the little rings makes another T. So that's another sort of 4T there that I've included in. And then in the foreground with the lights and everything and the hands, on the left side, there's a wrench and a nut and 2 bolts. And so the wrench has Cecil, or an abbreviated Cecil, on it. And that's sort of how I'm sort of showing how William Cecil disassembled Edward de Vere's inheritance from his father and emasculated him in a number of ways and forced him to marry his daughter, et cetera, et cetera. He was one father figure, a bad father figure, and an unwelcome father figure in his life. The 2 books in the middle also represent other father figures in his life. The copy of Metamorphoses, Ovid's Metamorphoses, representing Arthur Golding, who was his mother's brother and who was his tutor at one point. This version of Ovid's Metamorphoses, it's credited to Arthur Golding as the translator, but a lot of people believe that Edward de Vere actually translated as part of his studies because it's so against the character of what Arthur Golding would have written. And then the other book is Beowulf, which sort of is another source material for Hamlet. I can't remember the name of the monster that Beowulf defeats, but it's sort of
Grendel. I think it's Grendel.
Hamlet and, yes, Grendel. And another one of his tutors or teachers, Thomas Noel, owned the only copy of Beowulf in England at the time, which he himself, hand scribed from a library he had visited. And so, that being a source material and Edward de Vere having been his student, that's sort of another huge tie-in for me. And then the other book there is Shakespeare's Sonnets, which is sort of an allusion to the potential for Edward de Vere to have been the father of Henry Risley, since he was the dedicatee of the sonnets. And I've sort of taken off the NETS of the sonnet, so it says, Shakespeare's son, the word son is sort of there. So these 3 different sort of father figures that were in his life, besides his father, who is represented center stage in the armor as the ghost. And we just see Hamlet sitting beside him, sort of sitting down, thinking about his lines, while the director is sort of fixing whatever is happening during this part of the tech rehearsal. And then I think there are, on the labels of the lights, there are some of the little numbers and things that, at least one of them, I think, in this one, that's like, I can't remember what it is. It might be like 1740 or I can't remember what that one is. I can't see it in the picture I'm looking at right now.
It's another layer.
So this one's all about fatherhood, even though the shaft of light itself.
It's another layer, Christopher, that you demonstrate through this series of the collaborative nature of theater art and how many different hands, pardon the pun, based on, the images in the paintings, how many different hands are involved in bringing a production to fruition. Now, it might not have been quite the same number of hands back in Elizabethan days when you didn't have all of the technical capabilities that we have today in modern technology, obviously, but there were still so many hands involved in bringing a play to the stage. And I love, as a theater artist, I love that aspect of these paintings and your homage to all of the different artists who are involved, from fight coordinators to prop masters to costume designers to technicians and lighting designers. It's really a wonderful depiction of the collaborative nature of theater art and how it all comes together through all of these different artists who have
every single aspect of it is collaborative, except for the playwright's work, and even sometimes that is collaborated with other, creative people on the creative team. So, it's incredibly collaborative.
Let's quickly wrap up the last 2 so that we can share with the listeners where these paintings are going to be on display and how they might be able to own them if they wish to.
Absolutely. The last 2 are quite a bit simpler. The seventh painting, that skull had a tongue in it, is the gravedigger scene. And we see in the action here that a stagehand or a props person is handing the skull, the York skull, to the gravedigger. On the stage level, we see some green fog rolling in, sort of that same Northern Lights-y sort of light scheme. And we see some gravestones, one of which I'm imagining is the Cecil, or in this case, the Polonius family gravestone. And we have Cor Unum Via Una, which is the Cecil coat of arms motto in Latin, which means from, what is it, one heart, one way. And in the original quarto of Hamlet, I believe that Polonius's original name was Corambus. So the second part of that is shown on the bottom, which means double-hearted, or in this case, double-faced, two-faced. In the middle obelisk, we have Pettit v. Hales, which is a play on the Hales v. Pettit case that the gravedigger's language is based on, which is some very complex legal terminology that a gravedigger certainly wouldn't have known, but that someone with, De Vere's experience as both a lawyer and well, not a lawyer, but as a judge and someone who studied the law, would have very much known about. So that's the center one. And then the other one we see peeking through the De Vere coat of arms and then the De Vere family motto in Latin, which is Vero Nil Varius. I can't remember exactly the Latin.
Yes,
but
that's
nothing
correct.
Truer than truth. Yeah, and so then in the other parts of this painting, we see the queen getting dressed in the back for Ophelia's funeral, and all over her dress are little V's and OX's. We see one of the throne from the chamber scene, from the fight rehearsal, the two light standards. Here's an interesting thing. The Bonner Miller Cuttings research about the £1,000 annuity from a petty warrant dormant that Shakespeare was given during the time of the Spanish Armada and throughout the rest of his life. That's represented through the grave trap £1,000 sign that we see on the trap. And then the 40 pound is obviously an allusion to the 4T. And then on the pressure gauge for the scenic equipment on the ceiling, we see a 17. V's all over the lift. And then obviously the exit sign in the back is just a sort of stark reminder that this is about death. And there are two spears right beside Queen Elizabeth, sort of, representing Shakespeare, spear shaker. And then the last painting, the native hue of resolution, is the to be or not to be speech. And so in this one, we see two people standing backstage, one person and then one person's hand. And then we see the actor playing Hamlet on stage. We can't really see his face very well because he's lit from the other side and only he's side lit from one direction. But we see his legs casting the shadow of a V, representing the V for Vere. He's carrying his book and his dagger, sort of, which represent his book and his pen, which he's, in the context of these plays, using to correct his image. You see the downstage left heading him Archwall. And then the people in the backstage area are obviously Polonius in his garb, wearing his Order of the Garter orders. Something that Edward de Vere always wanted to be and never was able to be, probably because of the machinations of the Cecils. And then the person in the context of the play that's standing behind the scenery with him is Claudius, and that's who I originally intended this hand to be. But as this picture developed and as the series developed, I sort of saw it more as the metaphorical hand of Edward de Vere sort of reaching its way through history and tapping, Lord Burleigh William Cecil on the back and saying, actually, I'm here to sort of reclaim my actual lives work as the author of Shakespeare. I know that sounds a little hokey, but that's in my own mind sort of what I was thinking. But that hand is wearing the sort of intaglio ring of the De Vere family crest, sort of showing how Claudius supplanted his brother, killed him, and took his throne. And there are a few other little things, some numbers and stuff in this one on the lights, representative of Edward de Vere's code name and whatnot, but this one's pretty simple.
So I encourage you, fellow Quillers, you go out there to, if you haven't already while listening to this episode, gone to Christopher's site, christophercastle.com, to look at these paintings. I encourage you to do so. You may want to forget that you listened to the episode and go look at the paintings and try to find as many of the references that Christopher has hidden into each of these paintings and see how many you can discover without his help, and then go back and listen to the episode and see the ones that you missed. There may be some you catch that he forgot to mention or didn't include in the episode. But it's a wonderful sort of, find Edward de Vere challenge that you can do with the images of these 8 paintings, which are now going to be on display. Where, Christopher, are they being displayed? You have a gallery showing of them, correct? Tell us the details about that.
They're in the Daniel Tucker Gallery at the AHA School for the Arts in Telluride, Colorado. And they're going to be up starting, I think, on September 3rd. They're getting them up for an event during the Telluride Film Festival, which is happening the weekend before my show opens. So they'll be up on the 3rd, but the show doesn't open until the 7th. And on the night of the 7th, the Telluride Shakespeare Theater, who did Hamlet this summer, actually, is going to be doing some readings of Hamlet and some of Shakespeare's sonnets. I'm going to be doing an artist talk. There'll be a little party. And then the show will be up until the end of September. It's currently scheduled until the 30th. There's been a little bit of interest in maybe having these seen somewhere, so we're trying to figure out that. So the 7th through the 26th at the very least, but probably through the 30th as well.
So if you live anywhere near or around Telluride, Colorado, you can see these paintings in person at the gallery there at the school. You can even meet Christopher at the big event on September 7th, as he discussed. And what a fun and cool experience to be able to watch some actors perform some of the scenes from the plays that are from the scenes that are depicted in the paintings from Hamlet. Would be a wonderful, fun sort of Shakespeare weekend there in Telluride. So if you live near there, you can find that information. You can see these paintings online at Christopher's site, ChristopherCastle.com. Remember, that's Christopher with a K, Castle with a C, ChristopherCastle.com. And how can I own these if I want to? That's the big question. They're up for sale, aren't they?
They are up for sale. I would love to keep them together as a whole group. We've been contacting Oxfordians, both here in the United States and in England, and just sort of gauging interest to see if there might be someone well-heeled out there in the Oxfordian community who would either like to own these outright as a collector, or who might like to buy these and give them as a gift in kind to a theater or a library or a cultural institution. One thing I should mention about the Telluride event is the same night of my opening, right across the street at the Telluride Library, which has a name that I can't remember, but it's the library in Telluride. The Folger Library is actually going to be there showing a copy of Shakespeare's First Folio. I guess they've been doing a tour around the country, and the American Academy of Bookbinders, which is based at the AHA School for the Arts, is hosting this event. And so we're inviting, hopefully, the representatives of the Folger Library to come and view these paintings as well, so which would be really lovely. But it's just an interesting sort of fortuitous coincidence that these two things are happening at the same time.
I love that. That's a fantastic combination of events there, and a great way to even just add to the whole Shakespeare weekend there in Telluride. That's a fantastic tie-in that's happening. And, I like to say there's no such thing as coincidence.
Exactly.
Coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous in our lives.
You asked about buying them, like how people could find information. Kristen Kwasniewski is the exhibitions manager at AHA School for the Arts. So her information can be found on their website, and you can email her there. And I'll also have her information on my website, so people can find it there as well.
Okay. And are you going to divulge, like, what are we talking about? Do you have a price tag on these? How much are we talking about? Or is that sort of a secret that needs to be kept for serious inquiries?
It's not a secret. We're sort of figuring it out right now. I just had a show here in Virginia where I live that was about the University of Virginia, and several of those paintings were bought by the university to be part of their permanent collection. So I sort of priced this series commensurate with what I sort of made on the last series. They're all in the $8,000 to $10,000 range each painting. But if someone was willing to buy this and donate it to an organization with some resonance to the subject matter, I'd be willing to negotiate on that price.
So there you have it, Quiller Nation. If you are interested, you can find information on Christopher's website, and you can talk to the parties that be about some sort of a negotiation. It'll be lovely to see these paintings on display in a prominent place where we can used them to help spread the word about the Shakespeare authorship mystery.
And I would just like to say one thank you to all of the members of the Oxfordian community, all of the researchers out there, the Hank Whittemores, the Bonner Miller Cutting, the Tom Renier, Alexander Waugh, especially, and many, many more people who, influenced this series and whose work I've read for years. I started my Oxfordian journey with the Curious Elizabethan Portraits and Hank Whittemore's blog and Anonymous and all of that stuff. So I would just like to thank all of those people for all of their hard work. I take no credit for it. I've just sort of visually synthesized it into these paintings. But they're the true heroes who are really, doing the work to figure out the answer to this story. So.
And what about lithos? Are there going to be lithos maybe available, or are the images going to be available, say maybe a series of Oxfordian greeting cards? I mean, I'm just thinking about how some of us who may want to have those images but can't afford to purchase the original artwork. What are you planning on, sort of a merchandise type of a thing where we might be able to access those?
That's a great idea. Yeah, my husband and I have been talking about maybe doing a series of full-size prints of these, and maybe a half-size print as well. And the greeting cards, that's a great idea too. So look out on my website. That might be coming soon.
I would love to see that. I would purchase a set of those, and I would definitely use them as whether it be thank you cards for actors in my company on opening night, or little notes to fellow Oxfordians, or, I would love to see a collection of cards with these images and, the titles of the images prominently displayed there somewhere, either on the inside cover of the card or on the back with description of you and your art and something like that. But, just an idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great idea. I'll definitely try to do that.
Well, thank you, Christopher. I really appreciate the insight into your work. There were so many little nuggets in there that I hadn't noticed. And now I'm going to go back and see if there are some more I can find that you maybe didn't mention in each of the images. What a fun thing for Oxfordians to go and do. Before we wrap up, folks, don't forget to find our growing library of bonus features at our Patreon page. You can get there right from the homepage of our website at don'tquillthepodcast.com. don'tquillthepodcast.com. Click on the red Patreon button. That will take you to the Patreon page. The latest episode is a sequel to the last one. It's on Antony and Cleopatra. But in order to access those special features, you have to join as a patron at the Serial Quiller level or above. There's about a dozen special feature episodes in the library now that you can unlock by becoming a Serial Quiller at our Patreon page, where you will also be entered into our monthly Quiller of the Month drawing. You too can have the honor of being Quiller of the Month and bragging to all of your friends, just like this month's winner, Cathaleen Riley Bishop. Thank you, Cathaleen, for being a loyal Quiller, and a hearty welcome and thank you to our most recent Quiller patrons. We couldn't do it without all of you. Thanks for your support, and thanks to all of you for listening every fortnight here at Don't Quill the Messenger. Remember to subscribe to our email list at our website in order to be the very first to receive full registration information about our Quiller event in April. And until next time, fellow Quillers, keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com. don'tquillthepodcast.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.